Hello Shack fans, it is me, and I'm still reading from chapter 4 like I was yesterday. We might get into chapter 5, you never know. But just to recap, Mac's daughter Missy has disappeared while he was saving his older children from their canoe upturning, and the leads are that somebody probably picked her up in a van, and it's somebody that they know because he left behind a little ladybird pin, and he's done that before, so it's somebody they know who abducts young children. Hi Joan. Hi Joe. Welcome. At 5 p.m, the first promising report finally came in from the Imnaha roadblock. As she had promised, Agent Wachowski immediately sought out Mac and filled him in on the details. Two couples had encountered a green military-looking truck matching the description of the vehicle everyone was searching for. They had been exploring some old Nez Perce sites off the National Forest in one of the more remote areas of the National Reserve, and on their way out they had come face to face with the vehicle, just south of the junction, where two roads split. Because that section of road was basically one lane, they had to back up to a safe place to allow the truck to pass. They noted that the pickup had a number of gas cans in the back, plus a fair amount of camping gear. The odd part was that the man had bent over towards his passenger side, as if looking for something on the floor, pulled his hat down low, and wore a big coat in the heat of the day, almost as if he were afraid of them. They had just laughed it off as one of those militia freaks. The instant the report was announced to the group, tensions in the station increased. Tommy came over to let Mac know that unfortunately everything he had learned so far fit the little lady killer's MO. Ted Spotted was well off the beaten path. Unlucky for him that someone else had been so far out there as well. With evening quickly approaching, an intense discussion began regarding the efficacy of immediate pursuit or holding off until daybreak. Regardless of their point of view, it seemed that everyone who spoke was deeply affected by the situation. Something in the heart of most human beings simply cannot morality. Causing harm to a child is still considered absolutely wrong, full stop. Standing near the back of the room, Mac listened impatiently to what seemed like time-wasting bickering. He was almost ready to kidnap Tommy if he had to and go after the guy himself. It felt like every second counted. Although it certainly felt longer to Mac, the various departments and personalities agreed quickly and unanimously to set out in pursuit just as soon as a few arrangements could be made. Although there weren't many ways to drive out of the area, and roadblocks were being set up immediately to prevent this, there was a very real concern that a skilled hiker could pass undetected into the Idaho wilderness to the east, or Washington state to the north. Whilst officials in the towns of Lewiston, Idaho and Clarkston, Washington, were being contacted and notified of the situation, Mac quickly called Nan to give her an update, and then left with Tommy. By now, he had only one prayer left. Dear God, please, please, please take care of my Missy. I just can't right now. Tears traced their way down his cheeks and then spilled off onto his shirt. By 7:30 p.m, the convoy of patrol cars, FBI SUVs, pickups with dogs in kennels, and some ranger vehicles headed up the Imnaha Highway. Instead of turning east onto the Wallowa Mountain Road, which would have taken them directly into the National Reserve, they stayed on the Imnaha and headed north. Eventually, they took the lower Imnaha Road and finally Doug Bar Road into the reserve. Mac was glad he was travelling with someone who knew the area. It seemed at times that Doug Bar Road went in all directions simultaneously. It was almost as if whoever had named these roads had run out of ideas, or simply got tired or drunk and begun naming everything Doug Bar just so he could go home. The roads, with frequent narrow switchbacks edging steep drop-offs, became even more treacherous in the pitch dark of night. Progress slowed to a crawl. Finally they passed the point where the green pickup had last been seen, and a mile later came to the junction where one road went further north-northeast and another headed southeast. There, as planned, the caravan split into two, with a small group heading north up the 4260 with Special Agent Wachowski, while the rest, including Mac, Emil and Tommy, went southeast the other way. A few difficult miles later, this larger group split again, Tommy in a dog truck continuing on down that road, where according to the maps it would end, and the rest taking the more easterly route through the park down toward the Temperance Creek area. At this point, all search efforts slowed even more. The trackers were now on foot and backed up by powerful floodlights while they looked for signs of recent activity on the roads, anything that might suggest the particular area they were examining was something other than a dead end. Almost 2 hours later, and moving at a snail's pace towards the end of one road, a call came into Dalton from Wachowski. Her team had caught a break. About 10 miles from the junction where they had separated, an old unnamed road left the one they were on and headed straight north for almost 2 miles. It was barely visible and deeply potholed. They would either have missed it entirely or ignore it, except that one of the trackers had flashed his torch off a hubcap less than 50 feet from the main road. Out of curiosity he retrieved it, and under the covering of road dust he found it splattered with specks of green paint. The hubcap had probably been lost when the truck had tussled with one of the many deep potholes strewn in that direction. Tommy's group immediately turned back the way they had come. Mac didn't want to let himself begin to hope that perhaps, by some miracle, Missy might still be alive, especially when everything he knew told him otherwise. 20 minutes later, another call from Wachowski, this time to tell them they had found the truck. Choppers and search planes would never have seen it from the sky, covered as it was under a carefully built lean-to of limbs and branches. It took Mac's crew almost 3 hours to reach the first team, and by then it was all over. The dogs had done the rest, uncovering a descending game trail that led more than a mile into a simple, small hidden valley. There they found a run-down little shack near the edge of a pristine lake barely half a mile across, fed by a cascading creek 100 yards away. A century or so earlier this had probably been a settler's home. It had 2 good-sized rooms, enough to house a small family. Since that time it had most likely served as an occasional hunter's or poacher's cabin. By the time Mac and his friends arrived, the sky was beginning to show the greys of pre-dawn. A base camp had been set up well away from the battered little cabin in order to preserve the crime scene. The moment Wachowski's group had found the place, dog trackers had been sent out in different directions to try and locate a scent. Occasionally the baying indicated they had found something, only to have it disappear again. Now they were all returning to regroup and plan the day's strategy. Special Agent Samantha Wachowski was sitting at a card table doing some mat work and drinking a large dripping bottle of water when Mac walked up. She offered him a grim smile, which he didn't return, and an extra bottle, which he accepted. Her eyes were sad and tender, but her words were all business. "Hey, Mac." She hesitated. "Why don't you pull up a chair?" Mac didn't want to sit down. He needed to do something to stop his stomach from churning. Sensing trouble, he stood and waited for her to continue. "Mac, we found something, but it's not good news." He fumbled for the right words. "Did you find Missy?" It was the question he didn't want to hear the answer to, but desperately needed to know. "No, we didn't find her." Sam paused and started to stand up. "But I do need you to come and identify something we found in the old shack. I need to know if it was..." She caught herself, but it was too late. "I mean, if it is hers." His gaze went to the ground. He again felt 1,000,000 years old, almost wishing he could somehow turn himself into a big, unfeeling rock. "Oh, Mac, I'm so sorry," Sam apologised, standing up. "Look, we can do this later if you like. I just thought..." He couldn't even look at her, and even found it difficult to come up with words that he could speak without falling apart. He could feel the dam about to burst again. "Let's do it now," he mumbled softly. "I want to know everything there is to know." Wachowski must have signalled the others because, although Mac didn't hear anything, he suddenly felt Emil and Tommy each take one of his arms as they turned and followed the special agent down the short path to the shack. 3 grown men, arms locked in some special grace of solidarity, walking together, each one toward his own worst nightmare. A member of the forensic team opened the door of the shack to let them in. Generator-powered lighting illuminated every part of the main room. Shelving lined the walls, an old table, a few chairs, and an old sofa that someone had hauled in with no little effort. Mac immediately saw what he had come to identify and, turning, crumpled into the arms of his 2 friends and began to weep uncontrollably. On the floor by the fireplace lay Missy's torn and blood-soaked red dress. For Mac, the next few days and weeks became an emotion-numbing blur of interviews with law enforcement and the press, followed by a memorial service for Missy, with a small empty coffin and an endless sea of faces, all sad as they paraded by, no one knowing what to say. Sometime during the weeks that followed, Mac began the slow and painful merging back into everyday life. The little lady killer, it seemed, was credited with taking his 5th victim, Melissa Ann Phillips. As was true in the other 4 cases, authorities never recovered Missy's body, even though search teams had scoured the forest around the shack for days after its discovery. As in every other instance, the killer had left no fingerprints and no DNA. He'd left no useful evidence anywhere, only the pin. It was as if the man were a ghost. At some point in the process, Mac attempted to emerge from his own pain and grief, at least with his family. They had lost a sister and a daughter, but it would be wrong for them to lose a father and a husband as well. Although no one involved was left unmarked by the tragedy, Kate seemed to have been affected the most, disappearing into a shell, like a turtle protecting its soft underbelly from anything potentially dangerous. It seemed that she would only poke her head out when she felt fully safe, which was becoming less and less often. Mac and Nan both worried increasingly about her, but couldn't seem to find the right words to penetrate the fortress she was building around her heart. Attempts at conversation would turn into one-way monologues, with sounds bouncing off her stone visage. It was as if something had died inside her, and now was slowly infecting her from the inside, spilling out occasionally in bitter words or emotionless silence. Josh fared much better, due in part to the long-distance relationship he had kept up with Amber. Email and the telephone gave him an outlet for his pain, and she had given him the time and space to grieve. He was also preparing to graduate from high school with all the distractions that his senior year provided. The great sadness had descended, and in differing degrees cloaked everyone whose lives had touched Missy's. Mac and Nan weathered the storm of loss together with reasonable success, and in some ways were closer for it. Nan had made it clear from the start, and repeatedly, that she did not blame Mac in any way for what had happened. Understandably, it took Mac much longer to let himself off the hook, even a little bit. It is so easy to get sucked into the if-only game, and playing it is a short and slippery slide into despair. If only he had decided not to take the kids on that trip. If only he had said no when they had asked to use the canoe. If only he had left the day before. If only. And then to have it all end with nothing. The fact that he was unable to bury Missy's body magnified his failure as her daddy. That she was still out there somewhere alone in the forest haunted him every day. Now, 3.5 years later, Missy was officially presumed to have been murdered. Life would never be normal again. Not that any time is ever really normal. It would be so empty without his Missy. The tragedy had also increased the rift in Mac's own relationship with God, but he ignored this growing sense of separation. Instead, he tried to embrace a stoic, unfeeling faith. And even though Mac found some comfort and peace in that, the screams could not save his precious Missy. The bad dreams were becoming less frequent, and laughter and moments of joy were slowly returning, but he felt guilty about these. So, when Mac received the note from Papa, telling him to meet him at the shack, it was no small event. Does God even write notes? And why the shack? The icon of his deepest. Even crossed his mind that the killer could be taunting him, or luring him away to leave the rest of his family unprotected. Maybe it was all just a cruel hoax, but then why was it signed Papa? Try as he might, Mac could not escape the desperate possibility that the note just might be from God after all, even if the thought of God passing notes did not fit well with his theological training. In seminary, he had been taught that God had completely stopped any overt communication with modern people, preferring to have them only listen to and follow the sacred words of Scripture, properly interpreted, of course. God's voice had been reduced to paper, and even that paper had to be moderated and deciphered by the proper authorities and intellects. It seemed that direct communication with God was something exclusively for the ancients and uncivilized, while educated Westerners' access to God was mediated and controlled by the intelligentsia. Nobody wanted God in a box, just in a book, especially an expensive one, bound in leather with gilt edges. Or was that gilt with a U edges? The more Mac thought about it, the more confused and irritated he became. Who sent the damn note? Whether it was God or the killer or some prankster, what did it matter? Whichever way he looked at it, it felt like he was being toyed with. And anyway, what good was following God at all? Look where it got him. But in spite of his anger and depression, Mac knew that he needed some answers. He realised he was stuck, and Sunday prayers and hymns weren't cutting it anymore, if they ever really had. Cloistered spirituality seemed to change nothing in the lives of the people he knew, except maybe Nan. But she was special. God might really love her. She wasn't a screw-up like him. He was sick of God and God's religion, sick of all the little religious social clubs that didn't seem to make any real difference or effect any real changes. Yes, Mac wanted more, and he was about to get much more than he bargained for.